Hey, Bright Lights, welcome to your 2025 predictions on the Space Doctor series, which is part of the architecting community. My name is Angela Motzi, and I'm an architect who specializes in the science behind design. Now, I know that this is not for everyone to look into all these different theories of sociology, psychology, anthropology, and more. So, to make it super easy for you to understand how your environment is impacting you and to make positive changes, or if you are an architect or interior designer, to help advocate for these in your designs with your clients, I created this salutogenesis deck. Now, salutogenesis is just a fancy word for health generating. And the deck has two parts. The first part are fundamental concepts, and the second part deals with the 5 aspects of salutogenesis, which I've identified through my research. And they are sense of coherence, self-efficacy, prospect and refuge, biophilia, and relaxation response. I also want to point out that each of the 5 aspects of salutogenesis are tied with one of the 5 elements from the philosophy of feng shui, or the art of placement, which my research is showing that more and more of the scientific studies that are done in the modern age is validating a lot of those concepts that the ancient Chinese were observing around the way that space was impacting behavior. So, what are they? Sense of coherence is associated with metal. Self-efficacy is associated with fire. Prospect and refuge is associated with earth. Biophilia is associated with wood, the element of wood. And lastly, relaxation response is associated with water. Each of those aspects has specific design prompts in them that will help bring out that aspect of well-being in your work. So every time I do one of these recordings, I draw a card from each half of the deck. And this time we are doing it to set the tone for us going into 2025. It is going to be a big year for everyone, filled with a lot of great opportunities. So, the idea behind today's reading is just to look at some overall themes that we are going to explore. Now, the first card that I drew from the fundamental concepts part of the deck is neuroplasticity. Now, I think this is really interesting that this card is coming up because it has to do with our ability to rewire our thinking, to form new habits, new belief systems, new thought patterns. And as you can see from the card, it's showing the brain really as a series of neural networks that can form and reform. And the way that the brain works is that if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you have a really strong connection and you continue to use it, it will become more and more dominant in the way that you think. On the other hand, if something hasn't been used for a while, like say those algebra skills you learned in high school, you're less likely to be able to recall them now because that neural network has kind of atrophied a little bit. Well, what we're calling ourselves to do in 2025, what I really see is the reason that that particular card came out is we're really entering a different era. And I think you can see it both in politics, in economics, in social issues going on in the world. Traditional belief systems are being rocked to their core. We're being challenged to think in a different way about what we think is good, what we think is true, what we value. So I see this as an invitation in the upcoming year to really start asking a lot more questions, even about the things you think you know. There is something called the liability of expertise, meaning that the more that you do something and the more skills you develop around it, the more likely you are to default to what you know works. In other words, you've formed neural networks around where your expertise lies. And that could be something like expertise in coaching or expertise in design or expertise in really any part of your life. So I think we're being challenged to go beyond what we think we know, to ask more questions, to ask how we could do it differently or better, to bring fresh eyes to situations and to problems in the upcoming year. Now, the card I drew in the aspects section of the deck is the Reticular Activating System. This is really, really interesting card to pair with neuroplasticity. So, as you can see by the orange, this comes from the sense of coherence aspect, and sense of coherence is about how meaningful, manageable, and comprehensible our environment is. In other words, how well we understand what our surroundings are. Now, the reticular activating system is a gatekeeper function in our brain. So, when we've decided something is worth our attention, it kind of sends that signal out, and we tend to then filter the information coming to us via our five senses to prioritize that, much like this satellite dish is sending the signal to the satellite. Now, when we think about this in terms of design, what are the cues and the environmental anchors that we want to leave behind? So, how can we put things in place that will make people then look for things that are more positive in their life or their environment? Now, it sounds a little bit complicated, I know, but it's as simple as if you've ever noticed having a conversation with someone about, say, a car that you're interested in, and then all of a sudden you start seeing that make and model everywhere. Now, it's not because all of a sudden there's more of that kind of car that is suddenly out in the world. It's that you've told your brain to really prioritize any sensory signal related to that make and model of car. So you suddenly see articles about the car written, or you're driving around and you encounter the car. That is the simplest way to understand how this works. Now, when we think about it in terms of design, certainly if you have an intention that you, for example, want to create space that is better for learning, that will stimulate thought and creativity, you will then start to notice more research on this, more articles on it, precedent projects that had that as their goal as well. You may hear more and more people talking about the importance of designing for creativity. So, by setting that as an intention, you're going to automatically suddenly start to get more information about that particular issue and how to design for it. We can also put little Easter eggs within our designs that help people look for things that are more positive. So, if we stay with this idea of wanting to have space that is more creative, what kinds of things could be placed within the space that might make a user then turn on their signals for creativity? Is there a particular kind of creativity? So, for example, maybe there is a lot of artwork. Maybe it's a maker space and there's some examples of crafts or ways that crafts can be applied in the world and make a difference, things that are really idea starters that can be embedded in the space, or the way that the people that use the space move around in it, what they encounter, the sensory experiences they have, could very specifically be designed to get them thinking about creativity in a particular way. In that sense, we're then priming their brain to be more receptive to creativity in general, but also whatever it is that we're trying to do. So if it is a maker space and we wanted to focus on fabric, that might be the cueing that we put into the space. If it is a classroom and we just want more alertness and attention for the students, there are things that we could do that would help them focus better and be more attentive and more alert. So, thinking about that is a really important primer to the brain of the person using the space, so that their reticular activating system sets in as well. So, as you can see, by combining neuroplasticity, the idea that we can and should think outside the box more often, should challenge ourselves more often. In fact, our brain is naturally going to be more creative the more we force it out of those old, worn, habitual neural networks and challenge our brain to make what we call connections to the adjacent possible. We're going to be a lot more creative the more we do it, but also how that then impacts our ability by setting certain intentions to be more creative around particular issues that we want to incorporate in our spaces. So I think these are amazing cards to draw to set the tone for 2025. This is all about change and seeing the world with fresh eyes and questioning the status quo and thinking about, how can we do something differently? How could we make it better? So thank you so much for joining me. If you are enjoying this content, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss an episode. And I will see you next time.